what? Okay. Another biological basis to personality, let's talk a little bit about hormones. You can talk about a lot of different kinds of hormones, but let's talk about testosterone first. Clearly, we associate testosterone with men, but it's present in both males and females. But definitely, it's more important for what's going on with males, and we'll talk about that. Basically, it's starting off. Basically, testosterone has an important role prenatally. During gestation, between 8 and 24 weeks, testosterone is introduced into the embryo, to the fetus, and essentially it leads to the development of the male external genitalia, the male sex characteristics. So this is the sexual differentiation process. Essentially, the developmental default is female. So essentially, we will all be born with the appearance of being female if we were not exposed to, or if we were unresponsive to testosterone. For example, there are people who have what is called androgen insensitivity syndrome, and these are people who are biologically male but developed with the appearance of being female because during gestation they were either unresponsive or they did not respond to the introduction of testosterone, and they developed physically like a female even though they were genetically male. Okay. And the androgen is not just physical. By the way, realize this: being a man is not just having a penis. Being a man involves the neurological changes that are affected. So in other words, there is the psychological, biological brain, essentially, that is essentially identifying you as a male. You have a psychological conception of the man has the psychological conceptualization of himself being male. Likewise, women have the psychological conceptualization of them as women. And they're not always going to be the same, by the way. There are people, for example, we've heard about people who are transgendered. This might be a person who biologically might be male, but psychologically they feel as if they are female. And it may have to do with what is going on in the brain, what's going on there. And at this point, we don't know enough about that to simply dismiss it and say, oh, they're just imagining things. There is evidence to strongly suggest that it's a real phenomenon, and that in fact the definition of being male is your sense of being of male gender or female gender is a psychological concept, and it's not just simply what is going on with your external features. Okay, so bottom line is testosterone, for example, has an effect on the person, not just in terms of affecting their physical features, which it does, but also what's going on in their brain. Sometimes boys, or girls for that matter, who might get overexposed to testosterone prenatally, actually report higher levels of aggression. So there may be something to this here, and it's and for girls, they're more likely to choose toys that are traditionally boys' toys. Now, again, it's hard to read too much into this, but there is, you don't want to read too much into it, but again, it suggests that something is going on with testosterone that is affecting not just your biological, physiological characteristic, but also something's going on in your personality. Okay. Testosterone has been associated with various aspects of personality in adulthood, dominance, and sometimes antisocial behavior. Basically, prisoners who are essentially who are higher in the testosterone are more they're more likely to have committed violent crime. So there seems to be a relationship between committing violent crime and high levels of testosterone. They may be getting into trouble more. They're more likely to be involved in aggressive pursuits, being a trial lawyer, an NFL football player, an actor. These are kind of like aggressive, in-your-face occupations, and testosterone may play some sort of a role here. Again, being reported as more dominant, more confident in social interactions. Of course, there's they may sometimes have that dominance can sometimes go too far in a relationship and may actually have them not getting married. They're more focused on independence perhaps. But anyway, so there's still a lot to learn about testosterone. But maybe there's something, so testosterone seems to maybe have been shown to be related to impulsiveness, sensation-seeking, dominance. So in other words, there seems to be something about testosterone that's involved in doing these highly active, maybe manly things, if you want to talk about that. But really, this kind of so there does seem to be something to this. As far as any concrete answers, not really sure. But some interesting things. Testosterone tends to rise after you were successful competitively. You get that rush apparently, and that involves testosterone. Testosterone goes up when your team wins, after you have sex, if you've been challenged by an insult. And again, think about the honor culture in the South. There tends to be a connection between testosterone levels and the likelihood of perhaps getting into fights to defend your honor. After a humiliation or a failure, or after your team loses, the testosterone has been shown to drop in research subjects. So again, there seems to be something going on with testosterone that's pretty interesting as it relates to our personality. And now you can connect this, so this testosterone, it's serving some kind of function in our body. Obviously, talk about the sexual differentiation, that's important, as well as development during puberty. But also, obviously, something going on personality-wise. And maybe and maybe affecting our behavior, and perhaps engaging in behavior, again, in line with evolutionary psychology, behavior that will increase the likelihood of successful reproduction. Again, that's the whole point of the theory. Essentially, is how can we explain how behaviors and characteristics have evolved to help us reproduce and increase the likelihood of survival of our species. Okay, so aggressiveness is useful in terms of asserting dominance and perhaps achieving and maintaining high status. Perhaps if we're talking about in the early days of our development, and perhaps in many animals, where you'll have one male leader, of a group, essentially being the most powerful, and maybe even fathering the most children in that particular group. For females, the aggressiveness, maybe like over excessive testosterone, would actually be a problem, because now it might interfere with childbearing activities. In other words, if the mother is constantly seeing a competition and a contest between her and her child, the child isn't going to be taken care of. The mother would now see the child as a rival instead of as someone to be cared for and nurtured, and may react in overly aggressive ways, which could be dangerous for the child. So essentially, this could be explained why the lower levels for women. On the other hand, remember how I talked before about cultural evolution versus biological evolution? Biological evolution is a very slow process. Cultural evolution is much faster. In our culture, changes in our economy and whatnot, which haven't really taken place for all that long, indicate, that for success, dominance and status is really not the most important thing. Maybe in a few fields it is, but really more or less, intellect and being able to cooperate and stuff like that may be actually more relevant for success than kind of standing around boasting. Okay. Talk about another hormone, oxytocin, and this hormone is involved in basically responding to threat. It's basically respond to to child rearing, nurturance, and whatnot. That's what this seems to be most associated with. Basically, we've talked about if you remember your intro to psychology, the fight or flight response. When we are in an emergency situation, our body arouses us to kind of either run like hell or fight for our lives, essentially. And this is what is going on, when we have an emergency situation. It's the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, your pupil dilation, increased heart rate, respiration, and so on. And this would be the fight or flight response. On the other hand, maybe there's a response to the emergency that's quite different. Maybe there's a response called tend and befriend. And this might be more likely for females, and it may have to do with the hormone oxytocin, at least to some degree. The idea being that, females, when the child is crying, the mother can't panic. The mother has to, kind of nurture the child and take care of it, and not essentially go into a panic, not run like hell, So the bonding essentially makes it more likely, for example, when an emergency comes around, for the bonds to be even closer, the tending and befriending. So in other words, instead of the response of fighting for your life or running like hell, you want to, take care of the emergency, tend to whoever needs help. Okay? So in an emergency, people need help. So you tend to whoever needs the emergency help. And you also befriend. You try to make friends with. You try to make peace with potential enemies rather than try to fight them or run away from them. And the idea is to kind of bring them closer. Get together and that kind of thing. And it's possible that the hormone oxytocin may have something to do with this. Okay, results in relaxation, calming, increasing mother-infant bonding, social bonding in general. And again, so this is what's going on with, this is like it seems to be like a tend and befriend type of hormone. Okay. Females tend to have higher levels than men. The androgen release, and androgens are testosterone specifically, inhibit the release of oxytocin under stress. So maybe high levels of testosterone, they're not going to be tending and befriending when they're under a stressful situation. They could be fighting and running. The estrogens actually activate the release, and again, that has to do with the estrogen more associated with females. So that hormone increases the release of oxytocin. It's released during orgasm, during childbirth, massage, and breastfeeding. So interesting aspects of motherhood are involved the hormone oxytocin is involved in several interesting aspects of motherhood. And again, the tend and befriend seems to be associated with this. Now, how do we assess biological processes as they are going on? You can't look at biological processes in cadavers. You have to look at living, breathing individuals in order to be able to see how the brain is in operation. And there are several ways of doing it. The EEG is measuring the brain electrical activity above the brain. The PET scans are looking at mapping brain activity, and the MRIs are particularly the fMRIs, functional MRIs, are really looking at what is going on in the brain as it's happening. Taking somewhat detailed images of what is going on. The brain again comes from the magnetic fields that are created by the neurons. So they use that huge, powerful magnet to try to essentially measure the changes in the electrical activity, changes in the magnetic fields in our nervous system, in our brain. Okay, so you can basically use the fMRI, for example, and many researchers have, essentially like to measure what people may be thinking, what people will be asking people to think about or look at certain images, and measuring their brain activity as they're trying to do these things. Measuring doing an fMRI while a person is trying to speak, while a person is trying to sing. By doing this, you're getting to see different areas of the brain which seem to be specialized in different kinds of mental activity or behavior. So a lot more we'll learn from this in the future, you can be sure. Now, if we want to look at what problems someone might be having from the behavioral process point of view, maybe you have people who have an oversensitive behavioral inhibition system. And this is a person who might have high anxiety, high levels of anxiety. So they are afraid of everything. They're afraid of doing anything they're afraid that they may be punished at every turn. Someone with agoraphobia, for example, may be afraid to go out of the house, because they're afraid of all the terrible things that are going to happen to them when they leave the house. This person would probably, you could say, has an oversensitive behavioral inhibition system then. Depression would also have the high BIS, and they would perhaps have a weak behavioral approach system as well. They wouldn't even want to approach to do things. Oftentimes people who are depressed, they don't even want to get out of bed. They don't want to approach the things that, they may cognitively know that these things are rewarding, but they just don't have the motivation to get up and do it. And this may have to do with the behavioral approach system. In other words, you may know what the rewards are, but they just don't have as much value to you with that weak behavioral approach system. With a strong behavioral approach system, you really want it. Now let's turn that around and take a look at someone who has an antisocial personality. This person might have a really high behavioral approach system. They really are going forward, but the low behavioral inhibition system is that nothing is holding them back. They don't worry about punishment. They don't worry about hurting anybody. So maybe the person with high sensation seeking, low MAO, high testosterone, this may be going on with someone with an antisocial personality. So again, there's still more to learn about this, but we're learning a little bit at a time on that. Therapy, there might be things you can do biologically. You can take drugs. There are pharmacological drugs, for example, antidepressant SSRIs. The SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which what essentially that does is it increases serotonin activity in the brain. So in other words, if the idea is that for someone who has depression, they have too low serotonin activity, anything you can do to increase the serotonin activity in the brain may alter their behavior, improve how they feel, and so on. Then again, to what extent do we want to use these kind of pharmacological treatments or any other kinds of treatments to perhaps change personality? What if these differences in the approach system or inhibition system or whatnot, maybe just reflecting individual differences, and if you are giving drugs that might change the person's personality, how ethical might that be? Realize this, a lot of people who are there are people who are on these particular kinds of psychoactive drugs who make the case that taking the drugs actually changes their personality. And sometimes they're not happy about that, in that it's making that kind of a change. All right, so I think we've pretty much covered the biological perspectives on personality. Obviously, there's a lot more that we need to learn about it in the future. But next time, we're going to get into the next chapter, the next set of perspective, the next perspective, which would be the psychoanalytic perspective, chapter 8 in the textbook. And I think you'll look forward to that.